And you were sharing with us about General Fair.
Fair, yes. And he, PCS, what we call a permanent changes station, which means he moved to another duty station. And that was when General Fair was a 2-star. So then came in General George S. Patton, who is the son of the George Patton. So I worked with him, and as a stenographer, he have weekly staff meetings. So it was my job to take the minutes and transcribe them from his weekly staff meeting. So as I went along, I had concerns because General Patton being an enlisted soldier's general, and that means that he's really for the enlisted people versus the officers, and he will help them more. So General Patton liked to cuss, use profanity real bad. So one day we were having a time, and this is just a little joke point to put in, and I felt like he was so disrespectful because I was the only African American in there, the only female, and I had to take notes. So when I transcribed my minutes to break him out of using so much profanity, I put all of it in the minutes, you know. So of course he got a little upset with me, but he toned his language down. So sometimes you have to do drastic things in order to get people to do it without even saying a word. But General Patton and I became really good friends, and he calls me Faircloth, and he has a memory like an elephant. So anytime he would see me, he'd say, "Hey, Faircloth, how the hell are you?" You know, and people would think, "How he know you like that?" And I never bothered to explain. But he helped to get my husband and I stationed together in Germany. And they were giving me a hard time. So I had a choice of 2 assignments, and that was the luxury of coming in as I did as a stenographer, because you get choices. So I was really supposed to go to a division, but a corps is a higher level than a division, and I was offered a job at corps. So I asked my sergeant major, I didn't know much about the Army, what should I do? He says, "Oh, Ernie, take the job at corps, because then you can have a little more clout." So the military is just as political as life. And I said, okay. So I took the job at corps, and when I got to corps, I negotiated for it. I say, "I will take this job if you will bring my husband here," because he was going to division because he's infantry. So he had to go to an infantry unit. But of course, they always have jobs that you can fill whether you're infantry or not. So I negotiated for the job. And they brought my husband to work right next door to me in the operations shop. And I took that job. Then a year later, who was reassigned to the corps, same corps I'm at. But hey, Faircloth, how the hell are you? And they were all so nervous because he was the type of general, he didn't have much to do with officers, they just worked for him. But he had a great relationship with the enlisted. And so they were jumping and jumping and jumping. And as African Americans, we are treated sometimes as if we don't know anything. So I act as if I didn't know anything. And so when I walked down the hall, I saw General Patton coming, but nobody knew what he looked like but me. So I said, I'm not going to say anything. So I went back to my office and I sat down. And when he came through the door, the first thing he said was, "Hey, Faircloth, how the hell are you?" And then I had this terrible lieutenant colonel that I worked for, and he got really upset with me because I didn't tell them that General Patton was there. So when they needed something, they would come to me and ask me to go talk to General Patton. Well, General Patton was such a great guy, and I know this should be about me, but all of this fits into the picture. He is such a great person until you just have to love him like a teddy bear. And I never had to want for anything while I was in the corps because he was there. So God always send you an ally. When he sends you someplace, he has already made preparations for you before you even get there, and you don't even know it. So the mission is not about the money or the job. The mission is about doing God's will. So while I was an executive secretary in the Army, I cleaned toilets for generals. I ran errands for generals. Then when I left the Corps, I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, where I met General Jack Walker. He was a 1-star being promoted to a 2-star. I worked for General Walker for 2 weeks without meeting him. He would call me up and say, "Hey, I need you to take a letter." Take a letter. He said, "Just go ahead, sign it, send it out." But my reputation had far exceeded me, because I couldn't understand how this man could trust me to do all of this and then sign his name and send it out. But then I learned that people had already talked about me, and they knew that I was capable. Well, Jack Walker was over one of the top secret projects of the Army. And I can say it now, but I couldn't say it then. It's called Test Bed. And we used to test all of these super weapons.
Test bed, B-E-D?
Mm-hmm. In California. So we had a testing spot. So after I got to meet General Walker face to face, then he got promoted to 2-star and went to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And he says, "You want to go with me?" I said, "We can't afford it. We just made this move here. We haven't been here 6 months, and I couldn't afford to make the move, uproot my husband, because every time I was reassigned, because of my job description, my husband got reassigned to good jobs too. That was our benefit. So Colonel Quinn was going to be promoted from Chief of Staff at Fort Lewis, Washington. That was in the 9th Infantry Division. He was being promoted to his 1st star. But in the interim, I didn't have a boss. So I was cleaning up all the projects from General Walker and doing officer evaluation reports, writing them and sending them over to him so that he could officially sign them, because it was an official document. And he would sign off whatever I wrote. So I had an encounter with the colonel who wanted me to write this evaluation report for him. And he wanted it to read outstanding, but he hadn't done outstanding work. That's the benefit of having a relationship with your supervisor, so you know how they think and what they're expecting of their employees. So I said, "Sir, I can't do that. I can't write this report and ask the general to sign it." I said, "He would be lying and I would be lying, and it is my responsibility to protect him." Oh, he just went off on me. He was on the phone, and he just went off on me on the phone. So bad, I was holding the phone out like this, and then Colonel Quinn, who was the Chief of Staff, he walked by, and he snatched the phone out of my hand. He said, this is Colonel Quinn, Chief of Staff. I want to see you in my office right now." Click! And I said, "But he don't even know who he was talking to, you know?" So your reputation is all you have. Okay, guard that. And I said, "Colonel Quinn, did you know who you was talking to?" I said, "That was a battalion commander." He said, "I don't care who it was. He doesn't have the right to talk to you like that." So when the guy came up to the colonel, still African American in a white society, I'm not trying to play the race card, but these are the issues that you deal with in life, period. And he called him up there, and he closed the door, and everybody could hear him chewing this colonel out from one end to the other. And when he came out, he came straight to my desk, and I'm shaking in my boots, you know. I said, "Oh my God, he got me." He says, "I want to apologize." And I was so dumbfounded, you know. I just, "Oh, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir," you know. But I ended up, after that, working for Colonel Quinn when he made his 1-star. So to say I cleaned toilets with General Patton. When I got to Colonel Quinn, I chartered his kids off to college. All the routes where they're supposed to stop, made the reservations, then made sure, trained the drivers, because I had to train drivers to be drivers for generals, train the drivers of what they're supposed to do, have the driver take the dogs to the vet, pick up the wife from the airport. All kinds of little things come in. So you're never too big that you can't do menial jobs. Because if you can't do menial jobs, then you're not successful at the big jobs. So Colonel Quinn, now General Quinn, was a 1-star. And basically I ran Fort Lewis, Washington. Everything that came to the command group had to come through me or through Dorothy. Dorothy was a civilian secretary for the 2-star, whose name is General Richard Cavazos. So when Dorothy wasn't available, everything else fell on Ernie. And everybody called me Ernie, never by my rank. So people really didn't know I was in the Army until they saw me in a uniform. General Cavazos had me working for him. That's what he said. I was his military secretary. So I had a little beef there between General Cavazos and General Quinn. But General Cavazos would have these big meetings, and he said, you want to see what a real soldier's supposed to look like? Go to my office and see Ernie. Ernie, boots are shine. He never knew my husband shined my boots. Her uniform stand tall. So General Quinn would come back and say, but when did you get to be General Cavazos' secretary? So in that we had another guy named General Lincoln Jones. So we had 2 1-stars and 1 2-star. 1-stars were either support or operations. So General Quinn was support. So any administrative stuff was his, and General Jones was operations, the range of battalions and all of those guys who are, okay, so they belonged to General Jones. Well, General Jones and General Quinn weren't the best of friends. So one day, I had an aide-de-camp. That's the guy that carries the general's paperwork, and he opens the door for the general and does all of those great things. So Brian was General Quinn's aide. And one day, General Quinn was off in a meeting, and so Brian and I, he was a lieutenant, we used to laugh, joke around, and coming down the hall was General Jones. And he called me in to take dictation. Well, he's a general. I'm not going to tell him no. So I went in and I'm taking dictation, and who comes back from the meeting early but General Quinn? And his whole attitude changed. I mean, he was just furious. Well, I had such a great relationship with his wife. So Brian came to me, he says, I just got my butt chewed by the general. What's going on? I'm supposed to know everything. So I said, I don't know, let me see. So I went in to test the waters, and I got my butt chewed, and I came back out. I said, man, I don't know what's going on. Let me call the wife. So I called Mrs. Quinn, and I said, Mrs. Quinn, what's going on? Well, she always referred to her husband as Q. She said, Q didn't tell you? I said, no, ma'am. I said, I'm calling you because we're getting our butts chewed left and right. So she says, what were you doing when Q came back to the office? I said, nothing. She said, you were doing something. I said, I was taking some dictation from General Jones. She says, does that answer your question? I said, okay, I got it. So I went back to General Quinn, and I said, sir, I'm so sorry. I said, but he called me. I couldn't say no. And so after I said that, he says, I got this. I never took dictation from another general after that, unless it was General Quinn. So I didn't know what the setup was, really. You never know why people ask you to do things. So you have to be careful about that. But anyway, moving on down the line, General Quinn got a promotion to 2-star. And he went to Maryland. So he says, you want to go to Maryland? I got a civilian secretary there, but I'll create a spot for you. but I don't know what I could do with your husband. I said, I don't want to go to Maryland. I don't want to go to the D.C. area. So he says, well, you can't stay here. You run this post, and they're going to be after you left and right. Because I had organized women on Fort Lewis. So when the females had a problem, whether it was sexual harassment, mistreatment, they could always come to me, and I would always go to General Quinn. So they had a terrible time in the barracks. The women didn't have any privacy, and they had a curtain up somewhere, and it was real tacky. And so they brought the issue to me, and I took it to General Quinn, and he says, well, why don't this weekend you go visit somebody in the barracks and see if it's really true? And I did. And when I got back, it was worse. I didn't even get back home good. I was calling him. I said, you know, this is so bad. You need to get over there. These women shouldn't be living like this. How dare you? You know, I could talk to him because we had that kind of relationship. That Monday morning, he came to work, put his stuff down, and he says, I'm going to the barracks. He says, and don't call anybody and tell them I'm coming, because generals are usually announced when they go. He walked through that door, and everything just started flying, you know. I mean, everything. And he chewed butt from the beginning to the end. All of that was corrected. So needless to say, that was the beginning of my relationship on that installation, that whenever somebody had an issue, take it to Ernie, she'll do something about it. Okay, so
the barracks and the women's issue, what year was that?
that was, oh, sorry about that, I'll take the battery out, I forgot.